Good morning, motherfuckers. We are now going over Subtlety Rogue. Why are we going over Subtlety Rogue, you might ask? Well, students, the truth is, Sub-Rogue has not behaved the way it behaved in Worlds of Draenor and the way it behaved in Legion. So it's an interesting one. Subtlety had historically a very good scaling later into the expansion. He used to overtake Outlaw or Combat, and then a little later on Assassination. This happened in Legion, it happened in Worlds of Draenor, but in BFA, Subtlety has remained one of the least played specs in the game, for Mythic Plus and for Raids. Literally bottom 5 of all specs, which is going to be interesting to cover because now in Shadowlands it's going to be one of the most played, at the very least purely based on their current state in terms of damage and strength. So it's going to be interesting to go over Sub-Rogue and see what changed. Before we go over the actual spec, let's look at what actually changed between the two expansions. Of course, you have some of it already in the pre-patch, so all of you can see it already, even if you don't have the beta. Some of the major changes: you are trading your Nightblade DOT, your maintenance DOT, for Rapture. Rapture coming back is much better than Nightblade. First of all, Nightblade also increased the damage on the target by 15%, which made it annoying to target swap. Whenever you wanted to target swap, you had this cock block of having to put Nightblade on the target, or you were doing 15% less damage. Now this one is gone. The other benefit is that Rapture is now going to last longer than Nightblade. Nightblade lasted 16 seconds, 18 seconds with Deeper Stratagem and 6 combo points. Rapture is going to last 24 or 28 with Deeper Stratagem, a full 10 seconds longer. This extra time you don't have to reapply a DOT is going to save you a bunch of combo points. These combo points are going to be employed in maintaining a new buff that is returning for you, which is Slice and Dice. Slice and Dice is going to be very nice for Sub-Rogue, and this is where we go in mentioning your scaling. Sub-Rogue has had, as I mentioned, historically very good scaling because some of their passives are very nice. The more you get gear, the more you get stats. Shadow Techniques, Relentless Strikes, your Mastery, and your Deepening Shadows are all pretty good to go in the late game. Deepening Shadows, reducing the CD of your Shadowlands per combo point spent. The later you go into the expansion, the more combo points you will generate, the more finishers you will use, meaning this passive will get more and more value. When you look at Relentless Strike, it's the same thing. Your finishing moves are going to generate energy per combo point spent, which means if you're playing with Deeper Stratagem, it's going to be 36 energy generated per finishing move. And your finishing move is going to cost 35 energy, which means effectively you will get a free finisher every time. And then you have Shadow Techniques, hence the very good synergy with Slice and Dice. The faster you auto-attack, the faster you proc Shadow Techniques, the more combo points and energy you get. Finishing this late game scaling niceness for Sub being your Mastery, flat out increasing the damage of all your finishers, which is pretty nice. It's not the best mastery in the game. As I mentioned, students, you should have kept notes. When you want to look at how good a mastery is, just look at how much of your damage it's going to include. In case of Sub-Rogue, all of your finishers mean roughly 40% of your damage, a little bit more, which is good. It's a good mastery, 40% of your whole damage to be affected by a mastery. Not the absolute best, but definitely a very nice one. Other minor changes were the fact that, for example, now you have your Find Weakness no longer as a talent, but as a baseline passive. This is going to be extremely easy to maintain on the target. It's not going to require some big brain setup. Your Shadow Strike is going to constantly apply it, so it's going to be basically always up. Not only that, but even your Backstab is also going to apply this, and even your Shuriken Storm. So it's going to be very easy to keep this passive up. Now, since Uldir, you have run with 2 Azerite traits, Inevitability and the First Dance, as well as a Blade in the Shadows. These were very nice traits which smoothed out your rotation, particularly the best one being the First Dance. Used literally the entirety of the expansion. This is going to be introduced and implemented in one of your talents, Premeditation. Now, Premeditation is going to give you 2 combo points if you enter stealth with Slice and Dice active, which should be all the time. It's still not going to be the talents you're going to go for most of the time for single target and most of the fights, but you have the option now to go for the 2 combo points on entering Shadowlands. Talking about Shadowlands, now we have to go into the actual spec. After we have gone through these changes, we should look at how the spec works. Sub-Rogue is rather drastically split into 2, right? You have the phase in which you are in Shadowlands and the phase in which you are not. The phase in which you are not is rather irrelevant, and it's only there for maintenance, keeping up your buffs, keeping up your maintenance requirements such as Slice and Dice and Rapture, If you're fighting multiple targets, you can even, spend your time using Rapture on multiple targets, maybe using Shuriken Storm on multiple targets so you can reduce the cooldown of your Shadowlands even further. Then, as your time to Shadowlands approaches, the cooldown of your Symbols of Death is coming close. Then, as you are at least 40 energy, close to full, you can Symbols of Death. Since Symbols of Death gives you 40 energy, you can Shadowlands, and then you can go into your 8 GCDs of Shadowlands. Most of the time being Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike, Shadow Strike, Eviscerate, Shadow Strike, Shadow Strike, Eviscerate. That's the counting you will have to go for, and that's what most of the time is going to look like. When you're trying to funnel, it's going to be done the same way, except now you only need one builder, because Shuriken Storm is going to do it all in one go. So it will go into Symbols of Death, Shadow Dance, and then Shuriken Storm, Eviscerate, Shuriken Storm, Eviscerate, Shuriken Storm, Eviscerate. Guess what? Shuriken Storm, Eviscerate. This is the strong point of Subrogue. As somewhat boring as it sounded, this is the damage profile Subrogue is strongest at. When you can go in the middle of a bunch of trash mobs, completely irrelevant, about to be mowed down by some damage padding specs like Demon Hunter, and you use those very small HP mobs, those irrelevant mobs, to gain a massive amount of combo points through your Shuriken Storm, to then funnel that entire damage into your Eviscerate on a primary target. This is, obviously very powerful, for example, in Mythic Plus, during things like Fortified Weeks and Bolstering Weeks, so that you get a Subrogue to target the biggest HP enemy in the pack of trash mobs, and then you just funnel it down with Eviscerates and Shuriken Storms. It's extremely powerful, and in raids is the exact same thing. When a bunch of ads spawn and there is a primary target, the Subrogue can go to town on it. Outside of this window, as I mentioned, it's just about keep up your Slice and Dice, keep up your Rapture, and then just wait. Wait for your Shadowlands to come back off cooldown. This damage profile is pretty strong for Subtlety because with Enveloping Shadows and Deepening Shadows, reducing the cooldown of your Shadowlands by 1.5 per combo point spent, you can pretty much lower the 1 minute default cooldown of Shadowlands to about 30 seconds, which is the cooldown of Symbols of Death. So you can line up Symbols of Death and Shadowlands together every 30 seconds, which is a very nice type of damage profile. It's going to be very, very easy for a Subrogue to have their cooldown ready whenever there is a primary target that needs to be burst down. Remember that with Night Stalker, your Shadowlands is going to be doing 12% more damage. Shadowlands already increases your damage by 15%, so now you add 12% on top of that, and Symbols of Death also adds another 15%. Are there really no min-maxing to be added in Shadowlands? Well, yeah, there is a minor one. One of the small tinkering, one of the small min-maxing things you can do is the fact that you have a pretty relevant conduit, which is going to be Deeper Daggers. Deeper Daggers used to increase the damage done to the target after using Eviscerate, the shadow damage, by 30%. Now it's been nerfed by a lot, because now it's only 8%. Still, 8% shadow damage is considerable, especially since when you apply Find Weakness on the target, your Eviscerate is going to be doing 50% extra damage as Shadow. So you want to make sure right before entering Shadowlands that you can use Eviscerate to proc this conduit, and then you can enter Shadowlands and start your Shadow Strike Eviscerate windows, where Eviscerate has the damage increase. That's just about it. There is no other weird proper synergy. The complexity of the burst window of Subtlety has been lowered by quite a bit. If you have tried to get into Subrogue, back into Warlords, or even Legion, and you got put off by the difficulty of having to perfectly slot in every single GCD in a very short window, having to pull energy, having to pull combo points and using everything perfectly, now it's definitely lowered. It's not as difficult as it was before. Your Symbols of Death give you 40 energy to make it even easier to get to the burst window easily. Your Find Weakness is now a passive that is basically always going to be up, so it's not going to be as complicated, which some people might dislike, of course, because they enjoyed the complexity. Now, when we go over the legendaries are not that impressive for Subrogue. Of course, we have the All-Star MVP, which has been nerfed by this point about 20 times, which is Akari's Soul Fragment. From the 100% effectiveness damage, it has been nerfed now to 25%. It is still a very, very powerful legendary. You have Finality, which helps you cycle through these finishers and increase the damage by 25%. This is going to be very powerful, likely extremely powerful later into the expansion. Let's go back to paragraph 1, where I pointed out their mastery. Their finishing move increase mastery. This is going to be very powerful, synergizing with the mastery. But the other legendaries outside of these are pretty poor. The Rotten has been changed a few times, and even now it's pretty weak. Symbols of Death is going to make your next Shadow Strike deal 30% increased damage and give you 4 extra combo points. You are sort of drowning in combo points as a sub-rogue anyways. Having a 30% more damage Shadow Strike every 30 seconds, which is the cooldown of Symbols of Death, is pretty weak. Your Akari's Soul Fragment is going to do way more damage than that in a 30-second window. So this is still, you know, under construction, this legendary. It's not as powerful yet. I wonder how many times. Same goes for the Deathly Shadows. Deathly Shadows gives you another small cooldown, because now your Vanish turns into a DPS cooldown, increases your damage by 15% for 12 seconds. This can fit 12 seconds, 1.5 Shadow Dances for 15% more damage, which is okay. This is particularly strong if you are playing with the Night Fae Covenant, Sepsis, because Sepsis is going to be an ability that is going to give you a guaranteed Vanish for free if the target doesn't die every 90 seconds, effectively more than doubling the uptime of this legendary, because you will get 2 different ways to enter Vanish. Still, even with Sepsis, it's not very strong, and without Sepsis, it's way too weak. Now, the other thing we have to point out for Sub-Rogue is their talents. We really have to, because their talents are very, very static and stationary. You know, when we consider the fact that obviously Find Weakness has been removed from the first tier, for nearly an entire expansion, the talents have remained the same. Enveloping Shadows, Master of Shadows, Deeper Stratagem, and Night Stalker have been pretty much used 99% of the times in raid encounters. Every time. When we discount Find Weakness being gone from the talent tree, then it's Weapon Master in the first row. It has been oppressively static when it comes to your choice. Your first row, essentially Gloomblade is a goner. It's going to never be usable. Weapon Master, it's always going to be taken purely because of the damage of your Shadow Strike. Premeditation is the only viable thing in Mythic Plus, because it's going to give you a very high uptime on your Slice and Dice because of the amount of times you're allowed to normally go back into stealth without having to use Vanish from one pack to the next. So this is going to be very good. It's going to save you a lot of combo points in Slice and Dice, and it's also going to give you 2 combo points whenever you enter a new fight. So that's very nice in Mythic Plus, pretty weak in raid encounters. In the second row, you know, Subterfuge is simply way too weak for Sub-Rogue. The entire thing for Outlaw, but specifically Assassination, is the fact that you can use abilities out of stealth for 3 seconds. This is already the thing for Sub-Rogue and Shadowlands, so the only extra effect for Sub-Rogue being 1 second extra of Shadowlands is just not strong enough. Particularly once you extend the duration of Shadowlands from 5 seconds to 8 already, so the longer you make the Shadowlands baseline, the weaker this talent is going to be. Once Blizzard made Shadowlands go from 5 seconds to 8 seconds in Shadowlands, they needed to buff this talent as well, but they didn't, so it's never gonna be taken. Shadow Focus is the only talent that sometimes had been taken in BFA, particularly in the first tier, because in the first tier, your borrowed powers weren't quite there. Your free resource generation of energy wasn't quite there, so Shadow Focus was helping you, fitting in all your Shadow Strikes in your Shadowlands window. Very, very quickly, this became obsolete, and it looks like it's going to be the same way in Shadowlands. Night Stalker being the absolute king, because of the 12% damage increase on your Shadowlands being extremely powerful. In the level 30 row, again, Deeper Stratagem, literally used for the entire expansion, and it will continue to be this way. Vigor is going to have a similar role to Shadow Focus, which you can use at the start when you're starved for energy, but not much else. And Mark for Death, similar to Subterfuge, doesn't really work well with Sub-Rogue, because Mark for Death wants to be naturally used in situations where there are multiple enemies. The problem is that Sub-Rogue has Shuriken Storm. Sub-Rogue, whenever there are multiple enemies, can already get free combo points with Shuriken Storm. They don't need Mark for Death. This is good for Assassination, is good for Outlaw, not very good for Sub-Rogue. And this doesn't change for Sub-Rogue, which means it's terrible. And Deeper Stratagem is just so much better. And then you have the last 2 rows. Absolute same thing. Enveloping Shadows and Master of Shadows are just the most used. Enveloping Shadows because of the CD reduction on Shadowlands. The fact that you can line it up with Symbols of Death with this talent more reliably makes it so much stronger. Alacrity is a completely out of place talent. You don't need that much haste. You didn't need that much haste in BFA, and now that you have a baseline Slice and Dice, this talent is dead. Dark Shadow was the only real contender of Enveloping Shadow. It's always been the debate. Do I want multiple Shadowlands windows, or do I want a mega empowered Shadowlands window? The option for about 90% of BFA has been Enveloping Shadows. Even after Enveloping Shadows has currently been nerfed, it looks like it's still going to be the option. In the last row, the situation is similar when it comes to single target and funnel. Master of Shadow is just more diverse, it's more varied. Energy regen within your Shadowlands window can just be used for everything, whereas Shuriken Tornado can only be used in AoE and funnel situation, and Secret Technique is mostly there for AoE. So Master of Shadow is just the more diverse and versatile of the talents, even though, especially Secret Technique, can be used. In Mythic Plus is generally also the better choice. That is pretty much the only real negative I would say about Sub Rogue right now, the fact that their talents have remained the same for too long, and they have locked you in place in the same talents for too long. Because the rest of Sub looks very nice. The way you play might have been, simplified a little bit. There is no more super big brain rotation required, which means if you had given up on Sub Rogue a while ago because you were put off by the supposed high focus requirements and high difficulty level of the spec, this is not really there as much anymore. You should give it a try in the pre-patch already to try it out. It's not as punishing and as complicated as it was, and I highly suggest you try out Sub Rogue. It is by far one of the most effective specs for melee DPS coming into Shadowlands, so you guys give it a try. And with this we are done. A much longer overview of Sub Rogue. I for one am pretty happy of the changes they have given to Sub Rogue. Overall, the Rupture, the Slice and Dice, the longer duration of Shadowlands, I think they were all very nice changes. I wished for some more diversity in the talents, but looks like they're not going for that anymore. I think it's a little bit too late to hope for any more talent changes, but we'll have to make do with what we have. I think it's a good change. Let me know what you guys think. I'll see you guys soon, and in the meantime, I'm off hunting Night Fae Furies.